here we are. Today we have a presentation by Izaskun Chinchilla Moreno. I will just introduce a little bit in the way I can, Izaskun, so with my very bad English and the what I know about her. So I think that this is really a great opportunity for us because Izaskun is an extraordinary architect of contemporary time. And a practical and theoretical work, which I would like to describe with two opposite words, that is concrete and ephemeral, is the result of her skills and obstinacy, of study and intuition, which allow her to always be in advance on the dynamics of trend and society. She graduates from the Escuela Técnica Superior de Arquitectura in Madrid in a very active cultural context, of which he soon, but already during his studies, become one of the protagonists. A cultural context, that of Madrid, where a new generation is born around innovative and highly skilled teachers, like Andres Perea, that is the person who introduced me Izaskun, I suppose 12 or 30 years ago, open to the great global teams. So in this time, this was quite something unusual. So together with Izaskun, there were André Jacques, Carlos Arroyo, José Luis Vallejo, that represent a generation of visionary architects recognized by the most important world institution and that operates all over the world. Thus, Izaskun obtained many international awards and participated in the most important architecture exhibitions, such as Biennale of Venice. And now, for this reason, she teaches at Bartlett School of Architecture in London. So it's something really spread all over the world. And Izaskun has participated in many architectural compositions since the beginning of her career, showing her incredible imaginative power and skills, passing to the Europans, up to the competition for the Spanish Pavilion for Expo in Shanghai, where unfortunately she came second. And in her works emerge a reflection on the themes of society in constant changes, and also on the role of woman and the impact of architecture on women. Always in advance of the time, she interprets the great current themes through architecture, from reuse, the ability to adapt circumstances, sustainability, to the need of shared space. She always uses micro-inventions of architecture which manifest themselves in details, but as well in the ensemble composition. Her continuous research on ways of doing architecture also involve processes as in the crowdfunding for umbrellas of the organic growth of the Dream Pavilion realized in New York in 2015. I gave you some money this time.
Yeah.
I had my name on a list somewhere. And but really, all the time a little bit in advance, because for today it's something very usual. But the crowdfunding in this time in Europe, nobody know what it was. And of course, her works are full of Spanish culture, made up of contamination, colors, patterns, shapes, that she updates, transforming them into new languages. So like everyone, I would like to be a little bit as Izaskun, but I know that she's the result of a great talent, but together with a lot of hard work. And the trip with his son back and forth to London to teach in the schools where she want to teach. She chose the school in some way. She chose and she was chosen by the school where she want to teach. And a career made of many choices, pursuing the pragmatic utopia, which seems to me to characterize her works and her life. So really, I'm very enthusiastic to attend to your lecture because it sounds all the time that I see your work something different, and this is what we need, something different. And so very happy that you accept to join us, and I let you the speech and have everybody a good time. I hope at the end someone will have a question for you. This is can be a good opportunity. So thank you, Izaskun, and you can start your lecture.
Thank you so much, Carlo. I also hope that there is going to be questions at the end. It will be a real pity if we don't have them. So let's promote that. Let's promote people starting to think about doubts that they have. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was brilliant, and I feel very honored. And I'm only going to ask you to email that test to me if you are so kind, because it was really, really nice. Well, today I have prepared a quite a special presentation because um, usually I tend to introduce the work we are doing at the office as the balance of three activities that are running in parallel. The first of these activities is the design work that most architects are doing around the world, either from, let's say, private commissions or from public ones that are most of the times coming from competitions. Then the second activity is research that you have introduced as some kind of key node in our work. And the third one will be teaching. For us, teaching is happening like a kind of laboratory in which many times intuitions, ideas, cross-disciplinary relationships that we are starting to have are able to be speed up and accelerate, so that most of the times, let's say, testing grounds that could be taken in the studio, in the office, I don't know, 1 year or 6 years, depending on the project, to be, let's say, fully explored, then Roberto. In the class is much easier, because in one term with maybe 15, 20, depending on the university, people coming from different places of the world, this kind of hypothesis and experimental testing is much faster. So in our work, the research is doing, let's say, some kind of in-between situation between the teaching and the design. And what we are trying is to close cycles of knowledge. So for us, research is the way we are packing our experience in the design process, so that is useful for others. Um, Most of the time, researching requires writing, many times requires prototyping, many times requires drawing, many times requires many other media. But we feel that writing is sometimes a very, very strong complement and parallel activity to the drawings. And we try constantly to redescribe what we are doing, so that for us, the definition of research start when the knowledge that you have acquired is useful for third parties, that is not your own office. So that's why what we try to do, obviously in academic institutions, but also in places like social media. In fact, the research is going to be key in today's presentation, because I was tempted to introduce you the main office of the main works of the office, like, I don't know, Castillo García Muñoz or Organic Growth, the pavilion we did in New York, and how we are structuring the different activities that we are having, and the different, let's say, research line. But because I know you are in a very specific task, that is, you are doing a movable piece of architecture, and I don't know, I have kind of an experience on that. I have decided to organize this lecture in another way. So I'm going to present you a piece of research that we have done that is usually related to the city, and then how this research has been the frame of a design exercise that is in fact a movable, ephemeral piece of architecture that is linked with this big scale of research, and how the two of them are, let's say, interacting together. So some of the projects that I'm going to show are not the most, let's say, the most well-known, the one that we have published more, or the ones that we have explained in more lectures. But because there is already a lot of lectures in the internet, I think it can be quite interesting, and also it will be very, very interesting to discuss actually with your own brief for the workshop. So I'm going to start with a publication that we did recently. Is a chapter in a book that is called the Boot Urbanism. And we were describing in this article, it's a long article, something that we were calling the boot currencies. We were trying to look at how actually boot seems to be a material usually applied in architect's mind in the let's say last detail of the architecture. There is a very established tradition of starting with very generic, non-materialized, non-specific drawings like drafting and sketching, and then only at the end of the design process giving precision and accuracy to materiality. In our experience and in our research, this notion of starting with vague, quite blur, quite undefined geometries, and only coming to the materialize at the end has been challenged many times because issues like hacking or recycling or upgrading or upcycling is always starting with a quite accurate definition of what materiality is. So in this article, we started to look at how to apparently very different categories like the territorial scale and the territorial metabolism, and a very small piece of architecture that is a movable piece that we did for a small restaurant in the north of Spain, how they both link together. In this particular project, we were looking at a quite a specific type of timber, of wood, that is produced in the North American forest. Is not the classic environmental wood, is because it's not like FSC that is planting the same or the double amount of trees that they are cutting. This kind of hardwood in the US is only taking what, let's say, the leftovers of the forest. So what they are cutting is only what the forest is not needing anymore, and what you have to cut naturally, and it has been proved over the years that is necessary to cut for the forest to keep growing. So something that is quite interesting, is that this is the proportion of species that are growing in the North American forest. You have, for example, here in number 4th in amount is the white oak. That is the one that is consumed in Europe most commonly, and it's only the 4th one. It's only representing 13% of the amount of timber that is growing in naturally in the forest. And then we have another like good serious, good amount of different timbers and different woods that are quite unknown in Europe, walnut and many others, and that they are not very common. So for this piece that I'm going to explain you further, this is the research work that we did, but I'm going to explain you also the design work. We took a very specific decision at the beginning that was we were going to use all the different species that are produced organically in the North American forest. And then we were going to use them in the same proportion that the natural forest is producing them. So to produce this piece that you have in front, that is a fully movable ephemeral piece, I will tell you about the program and the use later. All these different pieces that you are looking at were weights, so we know actually the weight they have and were measured by their volume. And we took the same proportion. If I don't know, walnut was 83% in the North American forest, it represents 83% in weight and volume in our piece. Um, uh, this is because we have the feeling that temporary architecture has a great opportunity to reflect on what time is meaning. And I think you have this task in the workshop at the moment. In fact, all architecture is ephemeral. I tend to say that, and it's kind of provocative. People look at me like, no, buildings are not ephemeral. Even buildings like pyramids from Egypt are ephemeral in some senses. For example, most of them has changed their use several times. You have a beautiful book that is called The Secret Life of Buildings, in which very, very, very old buildings, I don't know, like a Pantheon in Rome, are described as building that has radically changed its use over the history. So all architecture is somehow ephemeral, and I think it's very good to situate, to locate your brain in that condition. The lifespan can be 3 centuries, or can be 1,000 centuries, or can be one day or 10,000 days. But at the end, there is always a frame. There is always a time frame. And in nature, and in the metabolism of urbanism, in the metabolism of our cities, these rhythms and these cycles are always happening in parallel. So our work here is to synchronize a little bit these two rhythms. We are just consuming the amount of wood and in the proportion that is produced naturally and that is understood as a leftovers, organic and natural leftovers of the forest. And this is introducing a kind of material frame that is established from the very beginning. So before I meet my client, that is Elena Arzac and Juan Maria Arzac in the north of Spain, they are amazing chef. And it was a timber company that is importing to Europe a North American hardwood that decided to make a piece with the both of us collaborating. But before we were deciding what to do together, we knew, or at least AEC, the company, and me were already knowing that we were going to use the timber in this proportion. So I'm going to introduce you a little bit what is happening in Arzac restaurant. They have a small lab in which they are looking at cooking materials. This is the real image of the lab. And they are researching constantly about species, ingredients, techniques of preparing food. Obviously, in the kitchen, you have 34 people working simultaneously, which is quite demanding. And the average menu is over 24 dishes, 24 different recipes that you have to test together. And we realized that in this contest, they are not only producing food, but they are also producing their own ways of serving food. So they have their own devices so that the experience of having the food is a fully integral one. In this sense, we asked them, what do you want, what would you like to have for your kitchen and for your restaurant? And they told us, to be honest, sometimes what we need is to have like a cloud of tools, because most of the times we are cooking this 24 dishes menu, and we are using an average of 300 different tools between pans, all sort of little forks, well, you can imagine, nitrogen, oxygen, many complex things. So we decided to design for them a kind of window in which they could locate around all the tools that they are using in a menu, uh, using the horizontal surface of the table, self in the two side, and then a kind of vertical unfolding amount of elements. And they were happy with that. They say, okay, it's going to be like having all the tools around in a very handy situation. But we were also saying, yeah, guys, but you know, what it should be amazing is also providing the clients and the customers with the same experience, so that all the tooling experience that you have around could be somehow traceable and could be visible for the people eating in the restaurant. So we decided to duplicate that window and to have a window for the cooker and a window for the customers, so that when the customer came to eat, they were able to see all the different tools that has been used in the restaurant, and they were able to even test some of the in between products that has been produced. So that this piece is was introduced in the restaurant, in fact in the kitchen, because in the kitchen they have the most amazing and expensive table in the restaurant, because you can test the food while you see how they are cooking. And then this device was introduced there, with the idea of having these two windows, one in which the cooker could have all the tools in a cloud around him or her, and same for the customer. In the making, and I think this is really interesting, all these issues of the urban metabolism and the ecosystem of the timber were related to fabrication. So, for example, the different amount of species that we were looking at were having a completely different density and a completely different hardness and stiffness. So the different procedures that we were using were going from very traditional wood workshop average activities to laser cutting and CNC. So digital fabrication, and that's happening for us in a lot of projects, because we live in Spain. Spain is not Italy, but is not the US or is not the Netherlands. And we are somehow in this Mediterranean contest. In our contest, 96% of the contractors, the companies that are dedicated to building, are having less than 3 employees. So most of our companies are really small. People in construction are really skilled. We have very good traditional carpenters, bricklayers, well, all sort of traditional workshop workers. Whereas we don't have a lot of prefabrication, we don't have a lot of industrialization. I mean, you are precisely in the north of Italy, which is quite a different situation, but in Spain, with the exception of the Basque Country and Catalonia, we are quite under industrialized. So it was a whole contrast for us to receive this education in the school in which we were told industrialization is the greatest and precast is the greatest. We have the feeling that this is quite non-critical thinking coming from the Central Europe, Germany, and the Netherlands, that was very influential when we were studying. But we feel socially it's quite tricky to apply this non-critically to Spain, especially because we have a big structural unemployment. Is over 15% in the good moments. It goes to almost 40 in the crisis. So we have decided to really work with craft and techniques that are giving people a job, and that is meaning to use a lot of craft in our work. So in this piece, you see how we were looking at CNC for timber elements that were harder, and really craft techniques for elements that were done with some other sort of timber. And you see how we were looking at this whole element, and how the two windows for the chef and for the customer were articulated together, and were allowing these devices and tools to be floating around the hands of the cooker. No, you see the piece here. It's difficult to go into the details of how the notion of the wood urbanism applies to the small scale, but because the PDF of the article is there in the internet, and we also have a quite good summary in the Instagram of the office, what I will say is simply keep in mind the biggest scale in 3 terms: geographical scale. So the responsibility of the architect never again applies to the plot. It's never about a small piece of land in which you are operating. The scale of the war is now your responsibility, because the timber we were using is growing in the US. We were going to the Basque Country, and this piece was exhibited in Germany and Central Europe. So it is a big extension of responsibility in terms of geography. A second extension in responsibility is time. We used to think that our responsibility was going to be the time in which our building or our design was going to exist. But now we have realized our responsibility goes back to the forest with a completely different time and reason and pace. It's about years and years and millions of centuries of a forest coming to a balance and establishing exactly which is the right proportion for it to grow naturally without any intervention of human being out of taking off some of the elements. So for having that, you have this notion of the metabolism that is happening in a big extension of time. So again, feel the responsibility of your consumption. For example, the consumption of timber is quite critical in the Scandinavian countries. People consume more than 10 cubic meters of timber per year, whereas in Africa, the consumption of timber, of wood, is lower than a liter, a liter per person. In many countries, it's almost nothing. So there is a whole responsibility in the notion of how we are affecting time and growth of materials in a wider scale. And obviously, climate change is there to remind us of that. And the third extension of responsibility that is linking this very small scale of the design with the metabolism is the ethics. That is, we are not responsible anymore of just the user or the client needs, but a whole range of stakeholders that are living on the forest or depending on it. Um, this project that I'm going to show you very briefly, I usually go slower in the best in the beginning and then tend to go faster. Is probably one of the last competitions we won, and is a public project for a camping. It's called a glamping because it's supposed to be something like camping with glamour. That is at the beginning of this trekking route in the south of Spain, in Malaga. It's a very special place because it's a natural park, and is really rich in bird variety and bird species, and it's also kind of uh, climbing wonderful place. So again, in this design exercise, we are designing temporary, semi-ephemeral. Is supposed probably that they are lasting 20 years, but still there is a time frame that is quite established. They are semi-permanent, they are fully collapsible, and they are reversible. We are not allowed to even make foundations in the place. And at the same time, with these two radically different scales in terms of space and time, we are trying to work with the way in which birds has been inhabiting this territory for years and centuries, and trying the architectural pieces to learn from that. So the experience of this camping is going to be living like a bird, and we are designing, as you see, quite low impact, the temporary uh, accommodation systems in which is, for example, the proximity to the water, the proximity to the shadow, the proximity to the different species that are growing in the site and that were growing, but they are, let's say, they were reduced because of the agriculture exploitation, um, are very important parameters. So for example, in here you see how our circular hanging tree houses are related to species like algarrobo and encinas, which are quite local species that were removed from the place to grow pines, which is a much faster tree that is killing the soil quality. So there is a parallel line in which we are trying to plant and to grow species that were lost, and they are appearing because this camping project is happening together. Well, you have many different pieces. I won't go in detail in all of them, but because I knew you were doing movable architecture, you see that in all these caravan transformation, we were also looking at this is like what are the actual possibilities of hacking existing vehicles to be inhabitable. But what is important is that, for example, the notion of water consumption is completely different when you have a territorial approach. So, for example, in this project, we were not building any big swimming pool, but we were proposing to let's say to implement 23 different small pools with a total natural depuration system. It's not using any kind of chemical, and it's not even salt, it's just planting, and it's macrofit with the sunlight that is purifying the water. And this is taking us to very small size, because otherwise it would be illegal in a public use. But it's taking us to a very interesting proximity or parallel experience between how the birds are inhabiting the place and how human beings are going to inhabit in this natural park. So that these bungalows that we are building are associated with water, and water is never farther away than 50 meters from the bungalow. So there is a kind of notion and constraint on how far you can go, how big the architecture can be, depending on the proximity to natural water. And these are going to be the common areas, like a big hostel and some other elements that are fully done with organic materials. Just because I know that you are in this ephemeral world of pieces that are dismantleable, I was bringing some of the technical details we are developing at the moment. We are site supervising this project at the moment, and it's quite interesting the building methodology that we have come through, because it's only timber boards with thatching. It's like a straw covering, and the structural system is creating like some U frames with these super light timber elements, so that there is almost no need for foundations, and well, it's a very redundant sort of extraction. We have a little bit of earthquake risk, so the structure is really redundant, but all of these allows first no use of any metal pieces, is fully timber based. Here you see the bracing and how it's done fully in timber also, and we are going to this double system in which timber is protected by thatching, and the local growth of the natural fibers and natural plants is allowing us to go to a fully organic, biodegradable architecture. Well, this is a slightly bigger piece of architecture, but with the same principles. I just wanted to let you see that there is a very big technical accuracy in the way we are producing this notion of reversibility. So it's not only reversible because the architecture is collapsible, but it's also reversible because in the case any of the pieces is abandoned in the place, is fully biodegradable. In every project, most of our projects are reversible, even if the reversibility is planned for 100 years. But we always start projecting with how it's going to be dismantled. But the requirements for this dismantling is different. For example, in this natural park, the requirements for biodegradability were really fundamental. There is a big shift in the lecture at this moment, because if in the first design exercise that I was introducing, I was looking more at how this, let's say, new responsibility or new concept of impact that is expanding geographically speaking, in weather and climate speaking, and obviously time-wise, and socially wise and ethically wise. And that applies or establishes a link between environmental context and design. I also think it's very, very important that we have this big picture of the big scale in the city, in a social and urban context, and the little detail in the design. So I was introducing here the notion of the caring city, for several reasons, because I think there is an over attention to all the productivity and all the productive activities in the city. If you look at any of our cities, it is regulated when a truck can be, let's say, taking, or an Amazon truck can be taking goods into your house. We know about the schedules for the trade, for the shops, for the business. We have a lot of regulations for any kind of financial activity that is happening in the city. In contrast with that, which are quite strict, well-organized activities, we have discussed a lot about them, and we have created a lot of regulations. We have simple activities like having a free glass of water, or trying to go to stay and rest in the public space without paying, or trying to have a walk in bad weather climate, being protected, again without paying, which has become difficult things to do in a city, and are highly non-regulated activities. For example, for most people, it is surprising that in more than 300 cities in the USA, it is completely impossible. It's illegal to sleep in the street. Well, maybe you think about it and it's not so strange, but if you think about it, it's quite radical in the sense that is resting is not a right for population anymore. Obviously, this is having lot of controversial situations. For example, the price of a policeman in the US to take homeless person to jail for one night, and then allow him or her to abandon the prison at the following day, is more than $2,000. So it's quite stupid, because that price will be enough for renting a home for the whole month. Obviously, the problem is complex, and you know that there is a big problem of homeless situation in cities like Los Angeles. But we are again importing some of the horrible regulations for urban environment with the so-called POPs, which are the privately owned public spaces that are starting to be very important in Europe. In fact, for example, in places like London, 70 of the most important squares in the city has become private in the last 15 years, sorry. So we really think that all the architecture that you are doing at the moment, there are small pieces of architecture that could move around the city, do or could have a role and a responsibility in this notion of the caring city, so that we demand quality resting as a social right, or game or playing as a social right for all ages, or biodiversity, obviously clean earth and water, obviously health body, all these all obviously promote affections, socializing childcare, so that we all understand that childcare is a communal responsibility, or the right of gathering together. No, I was bringing all these notions because, again, I have the feeling that a very small architecture could have a whole role in reactivating these layers of the city. To show how this could happen, I'm bringing a couple of projects that I will go through quite briefly. This is a project that we did in London, in Somerstown, and we were trying to promote children biking to school in early ages, not only then alone, independently, but in bigger groups, so that they could establish their first social independency by biking together to the school, biking in a family, biking with other friends, biking with several families. To promote that, obviously we have to deal with many issues. The first radical one is security. Through different workshops, we discovering children when they are 4 year old, they are able to repeat simple itineraries like going to the bakery. They have gone several times. But in London, they are not allowed to travel alone until they are 14. So there is a big gap of 10 years in which the children are actually able to do things, but they are not allowed for security reasons. So we are choosing a city pattern in which we are putting our children in risk for having a very small amount of the population taking a car from home to work. At the moment, in the central London, is less than 8% of the population that is able to take a car, because it's very expensive. You have to pay a lot of taxes. So we decided, let's really start claiming this public space for what it has to be: all ages, mental development. We use architecture in the place to start guiding the children for their independent traveling. We built up these movable doll houses of the 16 listed heritage buildings in the neighborhood. And we ask simple questions to children like, do you know what this building is and where it is? Our surprise was that none of the answers were including any notion of shape, material, geometry, or location. So everything that we study in the architectural school, like urbanism, geometry, construction, and materials, is not creating any impact. The only thing that children were remembering were the experience in the building. So Euston Station was the place in which they received their family first time they came to visit to London, or St. Martin Church was the place in which they were singing with their aunt. Uh, and that was pretty interesting, because in fact the notion of navigating the street is based on that sort of experience. So with this kind of workshop, what we did is asking the children to draw their memories of the buildings and put them in the windows, so that they were able to associate their own memories to the facade of the buildings. And from that, we started to realize that they were able to repeat itineraries if we were locating the buildings by their own memories and not by a kind of, let's say, objective to the maps. Also, the issue of using three-dimensional models and starting to map together with them, anticipate the possibility of doing independent traveling in almost 2 or 3 ages. So people, for example, like 8-year-old children, you were trying to instruct or tell them how to travel in the city with names of the street or a map, and it was impossible. But with this kind of game, using their own memories and the three-dimensional representation of the city, children that were 5 were able to repeat these complex itineraries. So we started to make these experiments of biking independently in the city, using elements like the heritage buildings to articulate the orientation of the children, so that in very early ages, as young citizens, they understood their experience in the building was really relevant, and the architecture was appealing their own biography. And these are some of the testing projects that we did to understand what were the difficulties for both families and children to navigate alone. We were also designing with them reusing sportive sport materials like kite surf, kites, bus stops that were intended to be placed strategically so that they can wait for a big group of people to bike together, so that teenagers could wait to be 12 to bike together, and the risk was decreasing significantly. Again, these are all movable pieces that were changing radically the use of the neighborhood, and this is like the wayfinding system that we create using listed heritage architecture for the children to start their first 3D mental view of the city, and how the pieces were actually moving. This is me and Adriana, one other architect, pushing some of the bus stops to be located in different moments in different schedules. And the result was quite radical because we increased more than 30% amount of children that were going to the 6 public schools in the area, biking alone. And well, of course, we were doing some street art also to mark the itineraries, identifying the different routes with different animals, and well, and creating a very complex set of very simple, very inexpensive actions in the site. This is again to send you a strong message of very small pieces of architecture can have a whole impact within a neighborhood. In this second project, to tackle the idea of caring in the city, is again a temporary project. It's fully dismantleable. It was only intended to last 1 week for a tourist fair, and it was supposed to represent the city and the region of Madrid in the second biggest fair in the world, which is Fitur. It's happening in Madrid every January. Let's see, next January, we never know. And it was a pretty interesting urban reflection. I was trying in this lecture to make you aware of how the littlest small design industrial design joint is linked with the biggest scales in time and geography. And this was a quite intense summarize of what the city of Madrid was, especially because it was commissioned by two authorities that were radically different in this moment. On one hand, we have the region that was PP, that is like the left-handed. I don't want to compare with Italian policy political parties, because your political parties are bringing all Europe crazy. I cannot cope with Italian policy anymore. But Pepe is quite right-handed, and we were also having in that moment in the council, it was Podemos. It was Manuela Carmena, that is like radically in the other opposite left-handed vision, and both of them were commissioning. It was a competition that we won, and we have to represent the region and the city together. It was difficult because they were not even meeting each other, so it was us like a ball going, like a tennis not like a tennis ball, going from one meeting to another. And it was really interesting again because we were looking a lot of things and trying to see how much they were agreeing. This was Madrid. This was key in Madrid. Um, so the first thing that we decided, it was looking why Madrid is very high, probably not so high as Rome or Milan or so many cities in Italy, but it's very high in the amount of people that are choosing to live there, being a foreigner, and very especially being a worker for international company. A lot of people that are working in international companies choose Madrid as a city to live. So we were trying to decide with a space syntax methodology. I will tell you a little bit more about it. If there was something formally in the shape, in the structure of the city, that was actually making it nice. Obviously, in our first approach with the space syntax methodology, squares were kind of fundamental elements that are articulating all the center of the city, and is not is obvious, but is not unimportant that squares are still creating a much higher rate of social opportunities. For example, you are much more likely to be invited to a party, a private party, in a Friday evening in a square than in a street with no commercial life, for example. So the first thing that we decided was that the whole space was going to be considered or shaped as an event square. Second thing that we were looking at, and again, I think it can be connected with the workshop you were running. We're looking at the stalls in the in a very important market, street market that is called El Rastro, and it's one of the most intense experience in Madrid. Madrid is not a monumental city. Barcelona is more beautiful. Vienna, Paris are much more beautiful. But Madrid is still alive. You can still go to El Rastro and negotiate a price. You can still have a very local conversation about food and get some recipes and come to know how really local elements and issues has been fabricated for years. So we decided to talk about the region and the council through the stakeholders. Both the region and the council were having a whole list of stakeholders, more than 100, including Real Madrid Football Club, El Prado Museum, that were very important activity promoters within the city. So we decided to give each of them one of these stalls. Again, it's 1 week project in terms of let's say the implementation. In terms of the design is much longer, and the research. So there is this way of incorporating this notion of the organic market, and then formally what we did was redrawing some of the public spaces in the city and seeing how permeability, for example, and what is called the topological depth, so how permeable the different layers of the city are, is really, really important in most of in the most successful public spaces in Madrid. No, this is drawings that we were doing in key places of the city to understand how private and public life were happening in transparent sequences, so that you were usually having an animated public space, an animated trading situations. You were having arcades that were visually permeable, and many times you were able to see what was happening in the private life of people. Again, something that might sound familiar from somebody from Sicily or Rome, and not to talk about Napoli, that is again uh, quite an standard in this, no? And this is happening not only in Madrid as a city, but also in the whole region. It's all about squares with a whole permeability, with a whole topological depth from the inside to the outside, in which the private life has participated actively in the constitution of the policy, no? So we decided to take this permeability, and for environmental reasons, all the structure was hanging from these elements that are you can rent, are called trusses, well, in an Spanish pronunciation that is quite awkward, and we were hanging all these elements, but respecting this permeability, no? So that you see how we were trying to replicate this topological depth with elements that were anonymous balconies that are fundamental in Madrid, all the stalls for the different stakeholders that were movable pieces. And that was creating a very interesting effect for us, because wherever you approximate the 1,500 square meters space, you were always finding a face. You were always finding somebody that was able to tell you about one particular activity that was happening in Madrid. There was not something as an entrance or as an official point. So everything was telling you the history of the city. No, this is a sequence of the drawings that we were doing from the original city, the drawings that we were doing for the 3D modeling for the fabrication, and the real site after the construction. The compromise with circular economy is there in many of our projects. I will briefly talk about this in these last two projects. So again, this is challenging the average process of designing, because we never start with such a sketch or draft geometry that we don't know what it is. Most of the time we start negotiating how we can get donated materials. In this specific project, the elements that were more important were the security fences that the council is using in demonstrations and to control traffic. And we were able to get 3,000 of them. So all the structures of the stalls and everything were done with them, but we were not able to weld because it's circular economy. They went back to their original use. So you see that there is, well, you will see some images in which you see all the vertical structures are built with that, and all the stalls. But in order to hold these elements, we need to weld additional steel elements that are allowing us to keep the security fences as they are, with reversible joints. Well, joints at the office is could be another chapter, long one, because a lot of the circular economy elements are affected by these issues. Even painting is a whole problem for circularity. And then also, beside negotiating this transit use of materials like the security fences, we were also using, for example, these nautical buoys that were donated after to a nautical school in Madrid, in a lake. And also we were using low impact cardboard and recycled materials for other elements. So again, what I wanted to show you is how very, let's say, ephemeral type of construction, quite movable, short of elements that are, let's say, structurally speaking, they are behaving and performing like a stall. It's quite simple kiosk. Are able to actually replicate or to actually critically review the spatial structure of the city and the spacing task condition. So this is again an invitation for you to reflect on not only how the ephemeral and reversible architecture you are planning and doing, the movable one, affect the user and the direct stakeholders that you are dealing with, but how it operates in the understanding of the whole grammar and layering of the city. And just to end with the presentation, I just wanted to say that sometimes also this notion of ephemeral, I mean, I have tried to travel through the lecture to three different definitions of it. The first definition of this ephemeral piece for me was like when you have a piece like the Arzac window device, in which the length or the amount of time that is going to last is very, very small compared with a forest, no? Like this ephemeral definition coming from the difference between what the design piece is going to last and what the material production is taking. And there is this big contrast. No, forests are taking thousands of years, whereas the extraction of timber is happening in 1 second or in 1 hour. No, so these notions of these radical scales of times, this radical difference, is let's say giving us a definition of what is ephemeral. Because if we don't look with certain precision, ephemeral, as I was saying, everything is ephemeral. Nothing is going to last forever. The second notion I was trying to bring with this other chapter of the caring city is how caring is an activity that is happening again, in the city all over years. But it's happening in an informal way. It's not organized. It's not really negotiated, and it's not part of the formal regulations, agreements, and laws of the city. And how these little devices, like for example, the bike into school bus stop that is allowing people to wait for other people to bike together, and these citizens being different ages, starting from 4-year-old, is giving new rights and new ways of articulating these activities. So again, a condition of or a definition of ephemeral could be, or at least a possibility of the ephemeral architecture, let's say an important functional approach could be how we help to articulate informal activities that are happening without the help of the architecture. And buildings are not going to help for that, traditional buildings. Even cities are not going to help for that. So there is a soft layer of ephemeral architecture, of ephemeral devices that could help in the better performance of these non-formal activities. I think, for example, the organic markets has always been like that, no? Like they have operated very actively, socially speaking, in articulating financial trade and financial activities that were happening with no, let's say, regulations. So this ephemeral layer helps articulating activities that are not having the same rights that the formal ones have, because buildings and cities are usually about the official formal rights of people and formal activities. And then in this last very short view of a couple of projects, I just wanted to say that there is also a definition of what is ephemeral in how we use the leftovers that we are constantly creating, because there is an official life for objects, no? Like I don't know how much a car has to last, no? It's 10 years, or 15 years or 20 years if you are really like in vintage, no? But and then what happens? Is the car disappearing? Are all the pieces disappearing? They are not existing anymore, or they do exist? So another important notion of how we can have a critical approach to what is ephemeral could be precisely what happens with the uh, periphery of the lifespan, those elements that are not intending to be used anymore, but they are still existing on Earth, no? So this is a small pavilion that we did. Carlo was referring to it and also donating in the Kickstarter campaign that we did. And it is composed of 350 umbrellas, 550 bicycle wheels, 120 photographer tripod, and 60 metal rings, like the central part of the car wheels. It was difficult to design because it was fully put together with volunteers, 43 people participating. It is happening in a small island that is in South Manhattan, only 3 minutes from South Manhattan, and it's in a very special situation because it's only used 3 months in summer. The rest of the year is only used, is closed to the public, and is only used for the helicopter of the President of the United States of America to land when he's visiting New York. So there is a very important social claim for the public use of this land. That is one of the green lands and green areas that is close to Manhattan and is not accessible. So these 3 months projects happen in the summer to claim for the social and public use of this project. And again, this was super interesting to look at because, for example, we discovered it took us 1 month and a half to collect together with just one van and 2 people all the 550 bicycle wheels. We were just going to all the workshops in New York every 3 days, and they were collecting the bicycle wheels for us, and it was easy. But still, imagine all this amount of leftovers that a city like New York is creating. The umbrellas were super difficult. We were expecting to find them in the lost and found. And lost and found are making options with all the elements that they are finding, so they get money from all of them. Nothing is cheap, nothing is for free, so we were not able to have any donated umbrella, and the only thing that we could do is finally have a Chinese a big amount of umbrella that were not able to pass the customs for security reasons, and they were donated to us. So what I'm trying to say is around every product that we use, there is a whole hidden reality of products that are not meeting security levels, products that are, let's say, being a leftover early for different reasons, products that are having a damage. And this is part of an invisible layer of materiality we are not dealing with. So again, for us, it's very important to critically define how this notion of what is ephemeral in an object is, because otherwise we use something 1 month, 1 day, 5 days, and then it's lasting forever. Plastic bottle, 1 hour use, centuries of being garbage or pollution. No? So these notions of big contrast between the long term and the short term is one of our critical way of practicing. In here you see how we created redundant structures, because the problem of working with recycled materials is that usually they are damaged. They have a plastic deformation that is not allowing them to perform like when you buy a perfectly brand new steel bar. So there is all these redundancy levels with all the bikes making a dome, a continuous dome, the supports being like pyramids, super stable, the bracing happening in different layers, the redundancy of every bar. Well, for example, the bikes wheels and the umbrellas being attached together so that they create a continuous dome. And here you see again the notion of redundancy and what we call capacity design, that is working in the rigidity of the structure by looking at the joints and not looking at the rigidity of the bars or the stiffness, because we cannot trust them. And how all these created this kind of a continuous structure, no? And this is a brochure we produced for the volunteers that were going to participate. We were creating this with a full-scale prototype that was done in Spain in advance, so that everybody could anticipate what was going to be their experience, the learning, the engagement that they could have. And well, for us, full prototyping is a whole research methodology, because our structural engineers are not trusting many of the things we are asking them. So only prototyping is sometimes bringing us to a mathematical process that is based in empirical knowledge. And you see here this device, no? But what I think is relevant for your workshop is this notion of the let's say the official lifespan of objects and the unofficial one. And I think the plastic bottle is significant enough, no? And I think there are images from one last project, but its concept is more or less the same. Is the VIP room in an art fair in Madrid, in which again we were called for a 1 week project. For us, it's really difficult because we do a lot of ephemeral architecture. We also do like more traditional buildings, if you want. But again, we always have this time policy, this time consideration, this recycling, this dismantling planification. But obviously, 1 week project is super difficult, because the day that everything is dismantled, you go to the parking slot and I don't know, your ethical values go down. It's like whole garbage production. So we are really trying to engage clients in the circular economy notion. In here we were working with El Corte Inglés, and and we convinced them to do all the structures with recycled window frames and ladders. And not only that, but to do that was also very important in New York, to do self-supported structures that could be useful farther away from the fair. So we work with these screens that were self-stable, and they were reused in a Corte Inglés building in Coimbra in Portugal after, for a gourmet space. So it was quite interesting that in this case we went to 100 recyclability. It was fully reused. And for that we were, again, is very complex, because you need to think about what is useful now and what could be useful in the moment. And for example, we came with this idea of fragmenting and segmenting the elements of the furniture so that they were not creating a functional unity, but they were allowing different users to engage with the objects differently. So for example, instead of using a table, we were combining 1,000 chopping boards in this big horizontal surface, so that some people were eating, some people were writing, each people was, or this Casio Monta, is like a little bit more like a Casbah space than a sofa, and again, people were able to engage with that element differently. Some people were lying, some people were talking in a big group, some people were sitting, and in here you see how the space was also quite big. So we were transiting from spaces for negotiation of contract, like people is traditionally selling the art products here, areas of eating and areas of eating more formally, like in here. But in all the cases, the reflection was about the pieces of furniture that the El Corte Inglés was going to donate, how they could be reused in a circular notion, and how the main structures could be self-stable in a more segmented way, so that they were more likely to be reused after. And then we were also working with memories of traveling in places in which people negotiate contract in the street, in the public space, creating this notion of a public space happening in an indoor contest, traveling from places like Dublin or Istanbul in Europe to this more Casbah inspired central space, and to a Southeast Asia kind of environment, but always playing with this idea of negotiating and creating a public space in the indoors. And I think we're about to come to the end. So I hope the questions are there. Thank you so much for your attention, and I hope it has been useful and significant for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Izaskun. It's a virtual clap for, I hope, all the students and guests of these conferences. I try to ask if someone has some question to you, just to raise the hand on the chat. I hope they will come, less shy. I know that sometimes it's astonishing to listen to you if you don't know exactly your way, your intended architecture. So please, if someone, I start with a harder question. Which are your, if exist, I don't know, but I suppose, knowing you and your belongings, your cultural references on contemporary thought? I mean, I suppose there is a lot of research on your activities. And so the starting point of a research is very critical, because this is allowed you to go in one direction and to the other one. So I don't know if you want to answer, which are your references? Where is the starting point, philosophically speaking, architecturally speaking, and so on?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to list, I don't know, a collection of authors or something, because obviously, I mean, you have people like Bruno Latour that I think has been very fundamental. You were mentioning before, like me and Andres Jaque and many people, even younger groups of architects like Zulo Arc, belonging to a kind of generation in Madrid that has been contesting somehow like another way of or a previous way of teaching, learning and practicing. And for all the generation, I think people like Bruno Latour has been very important as sociologists. But more than particular authors, what I will say is um, I was trying to refer to that when I was talking about cycling to school. My feeling is that what is different about our inspirations, and I'm talking about this a little bit like a generation. I'm not going to say that we are the same, because we are not, but probably we are more similar to what other I don't know, groups of architects in the world could be, no? So I think what is different is that when we look at the program that we are still studying in the Madrid Public School of Architecture, and most of the public schools and architectural schools of the world is not an exception. We can see that we are having a lot of subjects and a lot of attention to actually the tools of the architect. No, we are talking about geometry, we are talking about drawing, we are talking about history that obviously spans and is more than a tool for architects. But sometimes we are almost approaching history as composition. So it's an interesting way of we have a subject in the School of Architecture in Madrid in which you approach history as composition. No? So all the effort is taking you to the tooling. You talk about building techniques, foundations, structures. Well, we are still in this notion of quite engineer background. My feeling, and I again think that is a generation feeling, is that the most important areas of architecture are not the tools of the architect, are the goals of the architecture. What can we do with the architecture? What is going to be what we are offering? Which is the benefits that we can create? And if you think about it, there is nothing in the subject that we are studying that are helping us to determine that. If you think about it, I don't know, what are the big benefits of, I don't know, doing a co-working building in the middle of a very established city? For example, that we can reduce the amount of carbons because we are reducing the amount of trips that we have to do daily because we have a working place very close to the place we live. Okay, this is one benefit architecture can bring. But can you realize that studying geometry, studying construction, or studying foundations? No, you can't. So for me, there has been two important recognitions or two important awareness that has been understanding that sociology, and I'm mentioning sociology as a big thing, probably is something between philosophy, sociology, even a bit of psychology, you know, like notions of how we really perceive the space, how we perceive is like color or temperature, that has been out of the of the degree in a way. And I think they are fundamental. Why? Because sociology is the opportunity that architect has to really discover which are the most fundamental and interesting benefits that they can create. And what is difficult about a design agenda is not only how to detail the joint, no, is precisely what is the benefit we can bring with architecture, what is the most important one, the financial, the social, the ecological. So I think sociology is, for me, is I wouldn't say it's much more than an inspiration. Is probably none of our projects are done without a sociological background. I don't know, from social capital, from Putman to, and many of them are done with sociologists in the team. Emilio Luque, Fabian Muniesa, or many people are there. For example, the Cycling to School project was the total budget of the project was £30,000, and I think 70% of it was waste was spent in paying sociologists and pedagogists that were helping and advising in the process. So for us, it's a very important one. And the other part, if you want to say that, on recognizing, one is recognizing which are the benefits we can create, and the other one is recognizing what is the impact of our activity. I think it's a completely different situation to define the architecture on um, how how let's say how good the architecture is because of the architecture or because of the impact. At the Bartlett, for example, in the grading sessions, many times I have a discussion that is, they present a work, it's usually super productive, and they present a big project, big in size, big in scale, and they say, yeah, the student has been very ambitious. And I say, why? He has been very ambitious because it's big. And they say, yeah, I mean, it's more complex, that is ambition. And I always say, in terms of the achievement of the architecture, in terms, let's say, of the internal logic of the architects, that is ambition. If you measure the quality of architecture for the impact that it is having, big doesn't mean good. Big usually means you are simply unaware of the impact and you are not actually looking at what is happening with what you are doing in a, let's say, secondary or uncontrolled side effect. So I'm not saying a small architecture is better. I'm saying when you are aware of the side effects that you are creating and the impact is something that you use as a parameter for value, then things change a lot in the architectural definition. So I think this notion of ecology, sustainability, resiliency, climate change, let's say all the social movement and all the scientific knowledge that is around ecology is again fundamental for the architect. And for me, these two, the sociology and the ecological awareness, has been the radical generational change in the, at least in the Madrileñan architecture, in my opinion.
Thank you for this articulate. I saw that there is a question, but I remember that I suppose in the library of Escuela Técnica Superior de Madrid, there is a sentence of Senso Iza, los más difíciles explicar a los estudiantes los que es arquitectura, los que no es. The most difficult things to explain in a school of architecture is what is architecture and what is. So maybe you were very influenced about these ideas. And okay, so we have a question from Luigi. Please, Luigi.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, very clearly, Luigi.
First of all, I want to apologize for my English and I want to thank you for the lecture. The question is, considering all architecture as ephemeral probably undermines the entire system of rules and canons that has supported architecture for centuries. Even if somehow the modern movement with its fragile architecture has started this trend of ephemeral architecture. So what is for you the borderline between ephemeral and permanent, of course, if you consider permanent architecture as an option?
Yeah, I think you are completely right. It's a very clever question. I think culturally speaking, I could almost say the opposite to what I have said. Culturally speaking, almost all the architecture is lasting forever, or at least the most relevant part of architecture. If you look at many notions that we have had, you mentioned the canon, but you have typologies, you have obviously techniques that are repeated, you have also ways of engaging with the city, and this is happening, I think, in a long life, long-term version all over. For example, many times I'm asked by journalists about the city of the future, and they are surprised when I describe a Mediterranean city. with values like complexity, capacity of walking, let's say of crossing the whole city walking because it's continuous, with values like mix of uses, a traditional center in an Italian city, and with values like sustainable principles like the vernacular architecture that we have built. And they say that, but this is because they say, oh, it's like, do we have to look at Singapore? And I say, no, the best model and the best pattern for a city is the Mediterranean compact city, and is the best. Scandinavian countries are looking at that, and it's existing, and it has been existing a lot of time, and we have abandoned some of it. So in that sense, in the sense of culture, nothing is ephemeral. I think we are constantly revisiting notions that has been there forever. As we were saying, it's not only canon, which might be more style, language concept, but it's also, for example, the vernacular architecture, the adaptation to the weather, the adaptation to the available materials, or the adaptation to the topography or the geometry or the geography, has been there forever. And I think the best thing we can do is keep looking at it and keep repeating. But what I'm trying to say is, materially speaking, and even if I can be more accurate, programmatically speaking, the social use that we do for the architecture, the social use that we give to every piece of architecture, and the materiality of this architecture is always depending on time. I'm not saying it's going to disappear, but if you look at long-term buildings, like I don't know, like a Gran Bazar, no, the Gran Bazar in Istanbul, the market. If you see how we have shifted in time, or if you look to schools, no, like take a school from the beginning of the century and take an after COVID school, and you will see how it is completely differently used. So even buildings that are existing for long term, materially speaking, they are not dismantled. They are many times redo. And we architects, and that's my approach, are non-conscious on how we are participating on that. For example, hotels, restaurants, and other typologies like co-working, which I know quite closely, are renovating their space, the interior space, average every 3 years, every 5 years. The higher the standard is, the more renovation they're doing. This is very critical in terms of ecological impact. And not only that, for example, Gran Via Street, which is the main, I don't know, one of the most symbolic streets in Madrid, has been renovated absolutely by all the mayors that has been in the city. All of them has renovated Gran Via. Some of them were bringing steel protections, some of other were making an homogeneous and regular new natural stone pavement, but everybody was redoing and redoing. So even in buildings like a big hotel, well, you have many of them in Rome, that you feel is a building that is coming from the 19th century. It has been there forever. Yeah, but every 3 years we are changing the interiors almost completely. So I'm being radical saying everything is ephemeral, but it's because I think ecologically the awareness towards temporality is really necessary, because otherwise we are contributing to throw away things that are still useful. And if you think about Paris, which is one of the most amazing cities in the world, go back to the images and look how the wallways are. The wallways in Paris are made out of mortar, is cement, is not natural stone. And every time they have to put a new pipe or a new service, it's a patchwork. They do a hole and they cover, and nothing happens. They put a date, and it's beautiful. Is this patchwork is natural, is the effect of the necessities, the social necessities. So I'm a little bit trying to be provocative to create awareness about a certain notion of something that is eternal and that in fact is refabricate and redo every 3 years to create an image of perfection and to create an image of being updated to the contemporary taste. Whereas in fact, it is fully creating an environmental impact that is non-visible. That's what I'm saying, that although I completely agree that the same that we are saying this in terms of material and social use, we could say there is a whole legacy of architectural language, of architectural uses, of architectural techniques, of architectural typologies that are expanding on history with no limits, and that's good. I mean, I'm for that.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't know if there are any other questions.
It's a pity because when I have the audience in front, I force people to make questions. Like
Yes,
the
we
one
can
that
do
is
it,
having, yeah, the one that is having the green t-shirt, please do a question. And it works, but it's true that in
So,
here.
okay, I checked to force someone. So, Carol from Poland, are you online? No, it looks not.
Yeah, it's not so easy in the online version.
No, it's not really. It's easy to hide.
Yeah.
I'm not present.
Any case, it's also true that I'm super happy if they want to send some questions on some emails or whatever. So
This is very dangerous, but it's okay. Okay, no more question. Okay, I don't want to force. They even have a full day, but okay, Izaskun, I really thank you. I hope that the student will find a way to research on the website and so on, because one of the good point of your generation, if it exists, this your generation of Madrid, is that everything is shared, and so you can find all the documents. I learned for the first time from you that the energy of the web is this to share,
yeah.
and so the same. I'm not sure that you are exactly in the same field of Jose Luis Vallejo. I think so, but everything of its product you can find and you can reuse as a lecture. Now, Carlos Arroyo stopped the sharing the lectures on the website, and I criticize him because up to 2 years ago, during my lectures, there is a reference. We can go to the website, and now I cannot find anymore. So this is really a pity. But
we can we can tell him.
Yeah, I told him, and so it's you can find all the material. But maybe we have a question. Let me see. No, no, I have a question. No, very interesting. Okay, so
you know that Italians are supposed to be shy with questions, so probably the topics are like no.
Yes, but in this workshop we have Egyptian, Russian, Polish, Chinese.
Egyptians are not shy, definitely.
No. Let me see if Egyptian is here, because yesterday he wanted to make a question and I interrupt him. Omar, are you online? Oh.
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Yes, I am.
Omar, do you have a question, please?
Now I don't have that, but the lecture was very fascinating. This approach of understanding architecture and introduce yourself to the different culture is brilliant for me.
Yeah.
Thank you for this lecture.
It's very interesting because whenever I go to Switzerland or Germany, I have a lot of concerns, and there is almost a bitter debate with the concept of precast. There is always like, but no, but precast is really about progress, and you really need to think about this carefully, because without industry, architecture cannot really go further, and there is this like a bitter contrast, and with Egyptian citizens, there is always this understanding, like spontaneous activities has to be negotiated, and yeah. I think the Mediterranean is still.
I live now in Germany, so I understand this.
Yeah, you understand both. Yeah. It's like no. My feeling is that I'm not going to say that Europe is not important, but because the European Europe has been so well formalized, so well articulated, so well regulated, we feel like the Mediterranean core is not so important. But in fact, sometimes my feeling is that we have many more things in common with the Mediterranean environment, that when you see like Central or North Europe, you say, wow, this is a little bit alien to our cultural world. So it's good that you were there. Thank you so much, Omar.
Yeah, welcome. Thank you for you.
Okay, for the last welcome, I ask people to show the face, because this is a sort. I don't know you, Izaskun, but speaking to nobody is very complicated sometimes.
Yeah,
because you don't see the reaction of the faces, or maybe people, you don't know if people is listening to you.
Yeah.
And it's but this is a real workshop, so you can see some of. Nobody want to make an intervention. For example, Angela, you are in two people, so it's easier for you to make an intervention, no? Do you want to say something?
No, I only want to thank you because I found very interesting the part which is linked to children and their experience of what they do and all these things.
Yeah. I don't know if you are working on that, but
yes.
Yeah. I will be super supportive with you going on that direction, because I think working with children is one of those empirical arenas in which you can really see the disconnection between the academics of the architecture and let's say the social use of architecture. I think we all have this sense, like, and many times it has been said, like, architect has lost the contact with society, but this is a kind of an empty sentence that maybe is not really meaning just one thing, but many. But my feeling is that the first time we came with these doll houses, and we were expecting just children to answer things like, this is the church that is very tall and is having a pitch roof and the materials are very dark. We were just expecting that. It sounds quite reasonable to remember a church like this. And it was, I was there in a Sunday, and me and my aunt were singing a song, and we were reading it in a book. And that was the building. That was the summary of the building. And we were saying, but you remember the roof? The roof is like very inclined, and it has like 2 towers, and it's dark. And they say, not really. And in that moment, you say, come on, what are we doing? It's like we are studying geometry for years and AutoCAD, and we are 3D printing things, and people only remember if they were having hot, or if they were eating, or if they were having a good time, or if they were singing. And you have the feeling like, it's because it's children. But it's not true. We were running a workshop with families, and what is significant for people is like, this is a stressful corner, because I'm running late when I pass through this place, and it's not even about the traffic density. So it's a really subjective view of the architecture, and because children are, I don't know, like much more pure, much more honest, much more open, much more playful, you can have a lot of empirical information from them. So for me, it was probably the workshop and the research, empirical research that we were doing in the last 5 years, in which we were learning more unexpected things about how people is perceiving architecture. And I was feeling much more like we really need to have subjects in the school like psychological perception, how we are actually perceiving a space. And it was very interesting. So it's good that you are there. Very good.
Okay. Another question, consideration. No, okay then. Carol, nothing from Poland.
Maybe something we can do is ask them what they are doing in the workshop, if they want to share, or no, maybe some ideas.
Carol, want to say something? Come on.
I should know my English skills, yeah. Better
Sorry,
if
I should be better in Italian, but
he's Polish.
Ah, okay.
Sorry, I can only say that it was super interesting, and thank you that I can see it. For sure, I will look for some more research of you and some more.
Okay.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, Izaskun, so I think that we can conclude even because they have other intensive days.
A very intense day, I suppose.
Thank you very much. You give us a little bit of oxygen in this strange period.